This is the London CTOs Lunch Club that we run every Friday. So every Friday we have a different co-host. The idea came from the fact that we run these unconference events once a quarter where people put sticky notes up of the various things they want to talk about. And naturally, we don't get a chance to talk about everything. So we were like, well, wouldn't it be great if we could just take some of those and let that kind of go into an ongoing series of events. So it was going to be a lunch club every day, but thankfully they talked me out of it and we stuck to just once a week. So now once a week we have that. It's designed to be relatively unstructured, so the host has complete say over whether there's going to be a long slide deck, one slide, no slides, and then is there to steer the conversation forward around the topic. So Chelsea should have put a document there. You can add your LinkedIn details to that if you like. But obviously, it's so important as CTOs to have a big network, whether you're currently looking for work or right now you're in work. At some point, you're going to be looking for your next role, and so many roles for CTOs don't actually get posted anywhere because they're placed through people's networks. So the bigger your network of CTOs, the better for you. So there's a series of LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with everyone there. If anyone doesn't know me, I think I know most names, recognize most names on the call, but if anyone doesn't know me, I'm Barry Cranford. I'm the organizer of the London CTOs and also the MD of RecWorks, which is a tech recruitment company. So we work with companies like Nutmeg, built teams for places like Expedia, BBC, ITV, loads and loads of companies across London. If anyone wants to have a chat about recruitment, then feel free to reach out to myself. Chelsea's also on the call and Jacob as well. And the details are on the document there. So I think that's it from me. Ken, I'll hand over to you and let you take it from here.
Lovely, thank you, Barry. Happy Friday, everybody. Good to see a good turnout of people here as well. My name's Ken Baxter. I'm a CTO. I've been a CTO for probably around 12, 13 years now, in both permanent and interim roles. I've kind of focused more on interim roles in the last few years, and I mentor aspiring CTOs and some CTOs quite early in their career as well. The question is always an interesting one, the technical role of the CTO. It comes up a lot. It comes up a lot on LinkedIn. There's a lot of different discussions, and I think you get a lot of different opinions. So one of the things that I find when you're talking to kind of a mentor or mentoring aspiring CTOs is this, probably the point you made, Graham, this massive confusion about what does that really mean? Does this really mean I need to still be hands-on in order to go into a technical CTO role? So hence really to pose the question, to be or not to be, that is the question. Because I'm from Stratford-on-Avon, so we're going to have a bit of a Shakespeare kind of theme to kick us off anyway. I'm just going to run through a few thoughts because there's some stuff here that people may not have seen, which may help to kind of start clarifying some of their thoughts on it. This is a paper that has helped me immensely, and I think I've passed it on to a lot of people and it's helped them. And I think the first thing is to really start to understand the CTO role. If you look on LinkedIn, and if LinkedIn and job boards were your kind of benchmark of what a CTO needs to do, you would instantly assume that all CTOs need to be extremely experienced, hands-on developers who are prepared to build the architecture, build the infrastructure, do the DevOps, do whatever else needs to be done. Because a lot of those roles are the roles that come up at a particular stage within businesses. So I'm not going to talk so much about this, but there's another slide in it. But I would definitely have a look on this. If I've got a minute, I'll actually drop a PDF of this onto the chat as we go along. But this is a great little article because it starts to break down, and it made a lot of sense for me, more so kind of in as my CTO career has progressed. And it talks about, just going to move this a bit out of the way on the screen. It really talks about, it talks about how CTOs evolve, not really just as individuals, but also the needs of the business. I think this is missing the point you said straight away, Graham. Ryan. And it talks about different stages of businesses, and we can probably all recognize these, and it relates them down to these different family, tribe, village, city, nation. Nation is probably, you're a Microsoft or an IBM or something like that, something that most of us probably wouldn't ever touch as a CTO. Personally, I wouldn't want to go near it with a barge pole. But the early stage, particularly that family piece, the startup business, which is what we see a lot of roles being advertised for, is really that kind of hands-on CTO. They're probably more the lead engineer. There's 10 people in the business. Somebody's got to build everything. You haven't got space to put in kind of big leadership levels that kind of run across a business of that size. But then as the business starts to grow, so complexity grows with it, with the number of people. And this article is a great one because it talks about something called the CTO chasm. And it's something that's been recognized where CTOs really start to become challenged to jump out of that family CTO and jump into the new expectations of a CTO role. And he sums it up beautifully with a mindset change from feeling a sense of purpose from the work by your own hands to the work by the hands of others with you leading them. And that's one thing I've certainly seen when you talk to engineers who are aspiring to be in CTOs, is that kind of lack of wanting to let go of building things themselves. He talks about really nicely in the paper, which is about the ability to move from being a chef, somebody that chops the vegetables, lights the stoves, cooks the food, plates it up, gives it to the customer, tastes the food, and actually then goes into somebody who is actually leading a team of chefs. They're no longer involved in that preparation phase. Their job is to make that team of chefs work effectively together. What's also interesting from my experience is that the technical founder, who is often obviously in that family stage, doesn't always become the CTO. One of my first CTO roles was working with two founders, one who was extremely technical, one who was very sales focused. And I joined as the CTO because the technical founder did not want to take on the responsibility as they grew out of that family kind of stage and into that tribe and village stage. He didn't want to do all the things that a CTO does. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that from my experience, what that looks like. So actually, even though he was the technical founder and initially he would have been kind of in that kind of founding CTO seat, he wanted to stay as an engineer writing code, even though he was the founder of the business. And 3 years later, we exited that business as a village size. So very successfully, he knew where his limitations were, and he knew actually what he wanted to do and what he not wanted to do. And someone described it to me really nicely a few years ago, which is that as that role starts to change and as the size of the business grows, your role as the CTO starts to change. You become the COO of a technical organization. Your job is to make this technical organization, this kitchen full of chefs, operate effectively with all the different nuances that sit around your business. And in doing so, you become part of the leadership team. And they described it nicely for me, which was, you're going to have to start doing more C and a lot less T. You're going to have to be sitting more in the C level and seeing the business from the C level perspective than seeing the business necessarily from a deep technical perspective. One of the things that I think always comes up is this whole thing, the CTO equals the best technical person. And I think that's a real misnomer that's often driven out of, again, look at the roles you see on LinkedIn, but it's also from where CTOs often come from. The majority of CTOs probably come from, and it'd be interesting to see where people in this group have come from engineering backgrounds, being developers, being architects, being real strong technical experts. I'm not. I was a developer many, many years ago. My background, my passion has always been around people, teams, processes, practices, and problem solving. So the reason why I enjoy being a CTO is that I enjoy problem solving, not that I enjoy writing code. I used to sit around people who were far better at writing code than I was. What I was interested in was, how do you get this big group of people who are incredibly talented at writing code to actually create something that's valuable for a customer? And there was an interesting article on the right which talked about this, and it came to mind because there was a discussion on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago I was involved in, and there was an engineer who jumped on this discussion and said, Mark Zuckerberg writes code. Therefore, if that's not an indication that CTOs should be technical, what is? Now, most of us aren't Mark Zuckerberg, and I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg doesn't worry about compliance and security and all of those things. He has a plethora of CTOs that do it for him. But what was interesting was that was a genuine belief that was held by a senior engineer and was within this conversation, which was that thing of the CTO has to equal the best technical person. And one of the things the article talks about is, it says, actually, as leaders, you should all go and get involved in coding because it gives you that sophistication that allows you to ask good questions of your technical teams. Or you may actually find your passion to be a developer. And for some of the founders I've worked with, the thought of them learning one piece of code, being able to write hello world, they would then be dropping into an engineering team, assuming that they are now technical experts. When I talk to people about being a CTO, the first thing I always say to them is, what are you passionate about? What is it that really gets you out of bed in the morning? Why do you do what you do? Because at the end of the day, when you go into a CTO role, you're going to have the same conversations with yourself. And the most important thing becomes, where are you going to add the most value within an organization? So when people say, how do I get more strategic? How do I kind of learn the things a CTO needs to do? The conversation I normally have them is, think about it from the person that's going to hire you. What is the value that you are going to add to their business? And you're going to be the person that's going to deliver that value. Is it going to be they need a technical architect? Is it going to be they need a COO for their technical organization? Do they need a visionary? Do they need somebody who's going to lead a team? One of the things I do is, so I've been an interim CTO for a few years, but some of the things that I've seen with businesses, and as an interim, there's probably other interims on here as well. You tend to drop into businesses at a particular stage in their life. They've come out of being a family business. They're maybe in that kind of tribe stage at the moment. They're trying to grow. They've got stuck. They've got issues. They've got problems. But I've seen this in working as a permanent CTO as well. As a CTO, this is where I see businesses struggle to grow. And I'm assuming here that every business that we all work in wants to go on that trajectory. It wants to go from being a village up into being at least at some point growing to the extent that it can go through some kind of event or whatever the founders may want for the business. But they're on that growth trajectory. And one thing I've seen from I think probably every single organization I've worked in without fail is where technical businesses struggle to grow. And it's things like founders being down in the weeds, micromanaging, not trusting people, poor strategy, either a poor or no business strategy, a poor or no technical strategy, or the two of them, but the two of them don't really line up and they're not really glued together. A weak operating model, teams being and businesses being very reactive as opposed to being very proactive. By an operating model, I mean, how do you run your business on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly kind of cycle? How does your business operate so that you can be a lot more predictive and a lot more proactive about things? That lack of leadership, a poor awareness of their current state. What is it that they do today and where does it add value to customers? And I don't mean they're poor at what they do. I worked with a business a couple of years ago and they probably had the best engineering capability I've ever seen. It was absolutely flawless. Everything was automated. They could deploy code, multiple times a day to a customer without any fear of there being issues. But they hadn't delivered to a customer for 3 months. But yet they seemed oblivious to it. The engineering team were just like, we're just going to keep on polishing this fantastic machine. And the rest of the business and the founders of the business are just pulling their hair out. So that lack of awareness of what is your current state and where do you actually need to add value to your customers and to the business. As businesses grow, one thing I think you often see, particularly when you have engineering leaders who have got a very kind of strong engineering mindset, is they naturally start to build silos. They start to build teams that reflect the type of people who've got in the business. They kind of hit that Conway's Law model. They start building front-end teams and back-end teams and infrastructure teams and integrate, rather than thinking about what is our overall flow of value that comes from through the business and to our customers. With that comes, I mentioned before about the lack of customer focus. These weren't stupid people. These were very bright, intelligent people who had just lost their complete focus of their customer. And with that often becomes, as the business starts to grow out of that kind of family stage and up into that tribe stage, the rise of product management. You've built your product, you've sold it to a few people. Actually, now we need to think about where we go next with it and how we test ideas with customers. So starting to bring product management into the business. The organization structure probably needs to change as suddenly your business goes from 10 people to 50 people. Trying to be experts in everything. You often, you start as a small company, you're trying to keep it cheap, everyone becomes an expert, and then suddenly everyone gets bogged down with who's the expert in what. So either there's silos of experts, or there's some things that nobody is an expert in that actually become really important. Risks and issue management, massive one. Customer issues that never go away. No one seems to take ownership and leadership. But the one thing that comes out of all of them, out of all those things, is a lack of personal development and a real impact on culture. And Rob Bainbridge did a great talk about this a couple of weeks ago, which I'm going to refer to in a minute. On top of all that stuff, there's usually a bunch of technical stuff that needs doing. Technical debt, legacy, process and practice not up to scratch, and so on and so on and so on. But as the CTO in all those businesses, all of that stuff on the left was for me to solve. No one else was going to step into the business and solve any of that for me. I had to go and solve all of that. But what was interesting looking back on it was that none of that was because we didn't have enough senior engineers. It wasn't because we didn't have enough technical experts. It wasn't because we didn't have ideas about new technology or what we should do next. And there wasn't any lack of opinion on what the business should be working on next. It was actually about how it all worked around an operating model to actually make the business scale and be sustainable. So for my example there, the key thing for me was, if I come in with a technical hat and said, I need to actually come and solve all the technical problems, all of these things on the left wouldn't have been resolved, and the business would probably still be where it is today. So data is everything. So I thought, okay, we need some data in order to go and test this theory. So I did a survey. I did a survey of tribe and village CTOs. I did a survey of one because I didn't have enough time to do 20 or something, which is me. And I sat down and thought about, with this context of being a technical CTO, and particularly maybe helping aspiring CTOs to understand what is it that you guys actually do if you're not writing code. Sure, I'm going to be sitting there twiddling my thumbs. This is a whole bunch of stuff that I generally did in most of the roles that I did. And I really split it into kind of four, which is that business activities. You're part of the C-level. You're going to be part of an exec team involved in the business strategy, investors. You might have internal technology and data that you're responsible for. There will be lots of business initiatives as you start to grow to 50, 100 people that might come from your people team, your finance team, your operations team, whatever it might be. You're responsible for financing, budgeting, forecasting. Then there's a people side of it, which becomes massively important. Not only are you kind of trying to develop a culture, but you're probably at some point going to start growing your own leadership team. This is your team of chefs that you're going to look after as that kind of head chef now. You're going to have to do some amount of coaching and mentoring, not just for your team, but maybe for aspiring engineering managers or tech leads within your business. Growth and recruitment is going to take up a huge amount of your time. And then there's things like people development. A lot of, I talked previously about, a lot of the issues in a lot of businesses are around, they're not actually really developing their people very well. The last organization I worked in, there was no career progression. People were just frustrated. People were leaving. We needed a career progression plan for our engineering teams. No one's going to write that. So I did. So that's one of the things that you're going to have to step in and do, because if you don't, your strategy and your ability to deliver technology is just going to fall around your feet. Then there's the strategy bit, your technology strategy. Your strategy, the underlying strategies in the business, architecture, infrastructure, engineering, however you break up your kind of technology strategy. And then there's the operating model, how you pull all of this together and you run your business. Because as CTO, you're effectively running a technology business within a wider organization. Thinking about where you're going next, forecasting scenarios, what's likely to happen to your business in the next 6 to 12 to 24 months. Are you thinking about that? Somebody has to think about it. What's going to happen? What's going to be the impact on your technology business, and so on. And there's lots of stuff here that I could go through. Then there's a customer element. I was often the escalation point for customers, particularly when we had customers who were taking products on for the first time. In one role, I owned the customer implementation and support team as part of the CTO. So third-party management, risk management, issues, disaster recovery, security, somebody has to think about all of this stuff and put it into one big holistic plan and then run it and deliver it and carve it all up and so on. And to me, that becomes the role of the CTO. In the middle of all that, there's a little blob that says technology and engineering. You've actually got to build some stuff. To me, if I had spent all my time in there, all of these things around the outside wouldn't have happened. So therefore, for me to make all of these happen, the only way that I could ever do that was to build a technology and engineering team that could take ownership of technology and engineering. So was I hands-on? No, I was hands-on with all this other stuff, but I definitely wasn't going to be the person who's going to write code, do a code review, or build a pipeline. My role was always to recruit people far better than me to do far better things than I could do. So quick summary, and then I'm kind of, this is really to kick it off, then I kind of open it really to a discussion. And that is that one thing I think I've learned from talking to a lot of CTOs, mentoring with CTOs and so on, is that one size doesn't fit all. Not just going up that graph of what a tribe to a village to a to a family to a tribe to a village and so on, but also think about it kind of within depth within that chart as well. Different organizations are at different scales in their journey. You may be in a startup that's 6 months old, that in a year's time is going to be 200 people. I've worked in tech companies that have had 100 people that have been stuck there for 10 years, and they want to get to 200 to 300 people. So there will be very, very different things as you go into CTO roles, the problems that you will have to solve, very much related to the history of the business and where the business is actually trying to get to. And then you trying to work out, where are we today, where have we come from, where are we trying to get to, and unpicking all of that. So for me, my strengths have always been to play to problem solving. You know, how do you bring order to a huge amount of chaos and then be able to take people on that journey with you and to help those teams succeed? That's what I get a kick out of. So so for me, CTO definitely does not always equal best technical person. It may in some, but for me, in my role, it is never kind of equal that. I always say to people, you know, what are your strengths and what are your passions? Because that's where you're going to deliver value. If your passion is around people and teams and seeing other people succeed, and that's generally where my passion lies, that's the value that you will add, is being that problem solver, getting all the noise and chaos out of the way so that people can really succeed well. That's what I enjoy doing. But make sure they align. Make sure that what your passions are aligns with what that business wants. Otherwise, if you're a CTO thinking, well, I've seen all the job specs that I've got to be a hands-on developer, right, I better kind of brush up on my development. If that's where your passion lies, and if that's what you really love doing, go and brush up on your development. Actually, if it's not, go and look for a different CTO role, because there are a lot of different shaped companies out there that need a lot of different help for a lot of different problems. One thing that resonated from probably all the businesses I've worked in, and Rob's talk a couple of weeks ago was absolutely brilliant on this, because I wrote it down, is culture will happen whether you're intentional or not. And one thing where I've seen businesses that have had a poor culture, some of those businesses have actually had a CTO in place, is that one of the things, particularly with an engineering mindset, is that they weren't focused on was that intentional culture. And that's a word that's kind of appearing now everywhere as well. It's about intentional culture. But I think it's actually a great kind of phrase, because it means you're thinking about it. If you don't think about what you want the culture of your business to be, from the way you communicate, the way you trust people, the way you hire, whether you even retain people, is got to be built around what is the culture of that organization. And I think Rob's advice was, no matter what you do in scaling a business, get that right early. So I think no matter what you do as a CTO, being embroiled in what good culture looks like is going to be critical to your success wherever you kind of sit on that ladder. So I think there's a role we have, which is to go and help aspiring CTOs actually understand where they fit into this big picture, because it's really difficult. Otherwise, they're just going to sit there confused, wondering what the heck should I actually be and what the heck should I do. What I want to do now is I'm going to stop talking, is really to throw this out to this group here, because I'm sure there are people here who have got some much wider experience than I have, maybe experience of being a very technical CTO, maybe experience of coming from not being a technical CTO. But I think there's this whole thing about CTOs need to be technical. What do we actually mean? I consider myself technical. I know how software development works. I know how products work. I know how to deliver products. And I know what teams do to deliver good products. So I have got a reasonable idea of what good looks like. Do I write code? You've got to be kidding. Am I going to do a code review? No chance. If someone asked me to do a code review, we have got a bigger problem within our organization. So what do we really mean that CTOs need to be technical? Does it mean we just need to have a rough idea, or I'm going to kind of leave that one to this group. Do we have to be technical, or can we hire it in? I've never been involved in architecture. I've actually got really good architects. That's the way that I've looked at my role. I need some really good people to do this stuff who are far better than me. In amongst all of that, how do we cope with the lure of new technology? You know, some of us probably thinking about 5 years ago, working in businesses, every business wanted to be a data company because there was this illusion that if you're a data company, you would get a bigger multiple of investment. Now it seems to be, I suspect, every company wants to be an AI company. So investors, founders, that's all they want to talk about. How do we cope with that as CTOs? If maybe, do we have to be the person that owns that, or do we have to be the person who, who resolves that? And how do we help aspiring CTOs actually navigate all of this as well? Because certainly, I think for my CTO journey, I probably stumbled into what a CTO does. I didn't have a mentor. No one told me what to do. I managed to land a job as a CTO, and then I probably made it up as I went along. And I think I'm still doing it, so I can't have done it too badly. Right, I'm going to stop talking because I'm really keen on to hear some of the points of people here. What are your experiences? Good, bad, indifferent, CTOs, technical or not? Go. Or I'll start picking at random.
Actually, can I raise my hand if it would be okay to ask?
Yeah, go for it. I didn't see that.
I mean, firstly, thanks ever so much for those words. It was really inspiring. I'm in a similar situation, but I suppose I'm approaching this from the opposite direction. You've been talking very much about should a non-technical person have to learn to code to progress, whereas I have a highly technical background. I need to turn it on its head because I've got a computer science programming background, been a CEO, CTO, and a lot of my CTO friends still have a real passion for hands-on coding. So I suppose the question I have is, if you want to max out your earning potential, but you still want to have an element of hands-on coding, is that possible, or do you really need to give that up?
Yeah, brilliant question. I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to let. Are there other people here? People here in that same situation?
I've worked with a number of founders who've been that hands-on person. I think I've recognised that same challenge as the business has grown, and I think the teams have found a frustration that they've still got a CTO being hands-on. Maybe interfering is how they'd see it in terms of the coding technical skills.
The way I like to sort of look at it is as a CTO, certainly in the sort of a village plus CTO, you're now a business leader that heads a technical function. So your success is the business goals, and you are there as an executive to understand and help your executive colleagues. How can technology help grow this business and achieve our business goals, which will ultimately be how are we growing our revenues, how are we getting more profitable, and how are we effectively managing risk. And so for people that want to remain hands-on, my advice is, become a principal engineer, a chief architect, because I think look coming back to that mind map that Ken put together, there's so many things to get involved in and have impact on the business. Your leverage is higher in those areas. If you're wanting to dive in on the technology, unless you are a very technical sort of product, then you're just going to be wasting your executive leverage on areas that could be done by somebody else, is my view.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan there. I think when you're so technical and you've got a very strong technical background, it's very difficult sometimes to balance not getting too far into the weeds. And then by getting too far into the weeds, you can almost compromise everything else that is going on around in the business and effectively neglect that. And so it can be a difficult balance not to get lured back into what you would consider your strengths. And therefore, I would consider that is that a CTO role? Probably not in the eyes of me, who's an aspiring CTO.
Oystein, you've got your is that, did I pronounce your name right? You got your hand up.
Yeah, that's good enough pronunciation. Yeah, so I think I agree with the last couple of comments. Like that, if you want to be that really super strong technical but also want to have that CTO title, then that's the startup CTO, right? Which I think you spoke about, Ken, right? That's really that early stage, and that is a perfect fit. But as you grow, I would actually say you might even be doing your team a disfavor if you still keep being so hands-on and technical and into it, right? Because as your organization grows as well, like you might think that it's a super flat structure, but actually for the juniors, that will also carry some weight, right? And then I think you're in a danger of not getting the right pushback, which you kind of used, or you get in that smaller teams, and then suddenly you're allowed to basically drive through some huge mistakes without people raising their voice, right? So yeah. So to me, then if you want to do that, then that's the small ones, or like it's mentioned also, like do the principal engineer role. But yeah, and I think as you grow, I think I heard recently this phrasing on kind of the main role of the CTO is to understand the business and bring that into the engineering team.
Yeah, I think some of the wanting CTOs to be technical and using that phrase to be technical, I think is perhaps a distrust maybe of the engineering part of the organization or the technical part of the business. The idea that unless there is someone there who can, I guess, speak their language, can keep control, they'll just run away, and the technical part of the business will be wild without that CTO. So I think as we're looking at it, we're saying we need to bridge that gap. We need to be able to talk to the business, understand the needs and desires, and organize that team. I think there's the fear that unless you are technical, you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to have those conversations. There's almost they'll be talking a different language and you won't understand it.
Isn't it a lack of trust in yourself? Because arguably you hire and fire those people, right? So it's you who hire and fire them in particular for their technical skills, right? And if I may, to the earlier conversation, one of my principles, every position I join, I set myself up a goal, work myself to redundancy. Okay, so you start with whatever you need to start with whatever is already there, and whatever may be a blank sheet of paper, but then work yourself to redundancy. What does it mean? It means that, on a day-to-day basis, on operational and tactical basis, things are taken care of. You don't need to get involved, let alone code. Code, I think it's like the lowest kind of denominator. Not just not code, not get involved in pretty much day-to-day running of the department. That is making yourself redundant. Where you are adding value is at a strategic level, whether that's some M&A activities, new partnerships, new kind of new idea generation, that side of things, But on a day-to-day, the successful CTO is the CTO that's not needed.
That's a great point. I think my benchmark was always, I can go on holiday and nobody cares.
Yeah, I think you guys make a great point there. So looking at it from a slightly different perspective, so I deal with CTOs at all different versions thereof that you've mentioned, and what I have seen is those that end up with their elbows deep in coding versus those that actually empower their teams and create the next steps. It's the ones that end up with their elbows deep in the code are the ones that make less progress. So we see it from outside of delivery, I guess. And those that actually empower and share and encourage are the ones that make great strides and end up usually delivering within the realms of the projects they're working on. So it's an interesting, you kind of amazing, interesting points on both sides. So interesting.
I think the previous one was good as well, because I think, from what I've seen, as all of that stuff in that mind map, the stuff that kind of I had to do, as the business started to grow, I would be handing that off. My job would be to build a team. So, an obvious one is kind of security, compliance, governance, that kind of thing. When you're in a relatively small business and you're in the early stages of that, I had to run projects to put ISO 27001 in. 2 years later, I've got a CISO who's responsible for doing that because I don't have the time to do it. And actually, there's other things that I need to worry about around the business strategy, growth, people, culture, and so on. So I think it's a great point that you also need to set yourself up for even on that mind map, you keep making yourself more redundant so that you become accountable for those things, but you don't take responsibility for them anymore. But your job is to have that map of, this is everything I'm accountable for. Is it covered? Does somebody own it? Are we happy with it? Is it going in the right direction for the business, and so on? So how's it cope? I'm interested with people with kind of the rise in new technology, particularly AI, which is a subject that's bouncing around at the moment. How do people here kind of cope with, the business coming in and saying, what should we be doing with AI? We want to be an AI business. How do you kind of cope with that? Maybe because obviously, Carl, you mentioned you got a real technical background, other people here haven't. How are you kind of coping with those kind of challenges?
We are a hardcore heavyweight AI business as it stands. So, our investors don't ask us that, they invest in us because of that. So I guess it's a mute point for us.
I'll bite on that one. I think that kind of this is where it's easy to kind of see that all the CTOs go and know everything about the AI and just devise the huge strategy and so on, right? But again, like I think it also falls into kind of like what you just said, like being able to delegate those different kind of areas. But to a large degree, like also the questionnaire is technical. Like you have to be technical, but what do we mean by technical, right? So in that sense, I think that's really where it helps to. You have to have the understanding. You have to be easily be able to level up enough, right? You need to understand what's going on. You need to be able to call out the bullshit, basically, but not necessarily, or hopefully not be the one that really dives in and knows all the details and is creating the whole AI strategy yourself, right? Again, I think that's an area where you need people that are experts that focus on it, that they're there because it's definitely a full-time job, right? And you don't have time for that as the CTO.
Anyone else had that kind of challenge?
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things there. So I think this is where being technical really comes in. So I think you can be technical in the sense that not in the critical path. So you don't have to be contributing code on a thing that goes into production. Something is like getting live. So like in this sense, like AI, right? It's like a thing that changes quite a lot. So it's quite important that if you feel that obligation, just like go play around with it, build some prototypes. There's nothing stopping from anyone from doing it. So that opens up a lot of vistas, I think. So in my previous role, I was like it wasn't a startup, it was like a large company. I was an engineering leader. So I was playing around with the AI, and I started leading the AI accelerator squad because of my experience. So I think that helps out in the sense that, okay, I'm not doing anything in the critical path, but I'm just like, out of my own interest, I'm trying to find out new stuff. So that really helps in that sense. So that's a strategy that that worked for me.
Okay.
It's interesting that the lure of new tech, because I haven't had any direct experience with going into businesses that want to be more AI, but certainly they were wanting to adopt cloud. And when you've gone into the detail of asking, well, why is it that you want to adopt cloud? What is it? What value add are you looking to get? What current problems will it address? And then when you actually do go into the detail, it's not actually cloud that will solve their problem. It's their current principles, practices, and processes. And there's lots of opportunities to improve on that. But then articulating that message to the board to say, actually, it's your current state that is more of a problem rather than cloud solving it or that new technology solving it. So go and sort out lots of shit in-house first before you think about adopting new tech.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I certainly had the business I worked for that said, I asked one of the founders, one of his business strategy was that he described himself as we want to be the Google for data for the industry that he worked in.
Mm.
And when I said why, it just stopped him in his tracks. So often I think with new tech, my first port of call, even as the CTO, isn't to we're going to look at new tech, is to go back to the business and say, what are you actually trying to achieve as a business, and why you think this is going to help you achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're almost being the anti-tech guy in the room. Whereas I've worked with other CTOs, particularly where they've just taken it on board and gone, okay, yeah, we'll go and have a look at that. And we'll go and spend 3 months running a pilot on something, and well, it never kind of really went anywhere, or the founder lost interest or something like that.
Yeah.
So.
I had a follow-up question to what you asked, Ken. So that is, so let's say, I haven't been in this situation, but I just wanted to say, like, okay, if you're in a situation where you need to make a decision, so either some team is stuck making a technical decisions that you don't know enough about, or there's a conflict and like people are not working well with each other, and like you have a sense that something is wrong, but you just need to deep dive and solve it, but you don't have enough information, you don't have the technical depth there. So I'm always worried about those things. So how, like, has anyone been in that situation? How would you handle that if you are in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Anyone want to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been in that situation a number of times, and I think you don't have to make the decision yourself. I mean, sometimes it's important you just listen to it and you choose an option just to help the team get unblocked. But the knowledge of the decision is already in the team. I think it's helping them have the discussion and come to a conclusion. So what are we aiming for? Maybe reiterate what's the direction, what's the bigger picture, what's the pros and cons of each option, and just take a team through an unblocking process. You don't have to go, okay, I've solved it for you. You just help the team unblock themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a really good phrase, unblocking questions. I think because I think a lot of teams will get blocked on, they'll get bogged down in the tech side and maybe don't think more about, what's the long-term repercussions of doing this? How's it going to impact our architecture? How are we going to support it? Do we have the knowledge in-house to do it? And sometimes I think you do get technical things where people have got ideas, and maybe as a business or as a team, they are not sure whether they should make that decision. And my port of call would generally then be, okay, so if you guys don't have the technical knowledge, who does? And it may be, if whether you're with AWS or whatever, there are fantastic technical resources out there that I think teams, particularly relatively small teams, can get their hands on, that they don't maybe use as much as they could, that would really help unblock them. So yeah, I think the unblocking questions are great, and sometimes the unblocking question is, well, I'm not going to answer it, so if you guys can't answer it, you need to find someone who can. And I think that comes back to that point about, I think, teams trying to be experts in everything. Small teams, they think they need to be the expert in something, whereas actually you can often just point them to, actually you don't, but we can darn well go and find someone who is an expert who can really help us, and we'll all learn from it. So you turn it into a learning opportunity, not a challenge to, you guys aren't bright enough. So.
Yeah, as a build on that, I often think of the role as, it's a bit like a conductor in an orchestra. Like the conductor doesn't need to know how to play all the instruments. The role is to make sure everyone's in time and playing the right thing at the right cadence and tempo and volume. And the CTO role is very much like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And some of the bits you have to play with the orchestra are remarkably dull. I think people don't realize that sometimes. And again, compliance, great one, that can be dull as ditch, but someone has to do it, and it's an obligation for the business. And again, when I've seen very technical people go into the CTO role, they've often not just flat refused, or just not even kind of looked up from their blinkers to actually say, do you know what, it needs doing. It's part of the business. It's part of that wider kind of business piece as well.
Penny, if I could just agree with that as well. I think it's not necessarily a lack of strength in certain areas for technical founders or strongly technical people, it can often be that there isn't that overlap between strengths and passions. Your passions can be a subset of your strengths. So yes, I could go and do some of the more sort of dry side of things, but if you have a passion for tech, sometimes that's what you're drawn to. So yes, that's kind of what I wanted to just chime in to react on that one.
I think it's a great point because, again, go back to that mind map of all that stuff, problems to be solved. The ones that I would probably be hiring people to do are the ones that I don't feel technically competent to do. And having done security and governance and compliance, whatever, I could go, well, actually, that's not the least value that I'm going to add. So I think it does come down to how your business grows and how you shape your team is often, a good way to look at that is what's the most value that I am going to add to the business? Where do I have less competency? Right, they're the good people I need to surround myself with. And I think then it's that aspiration that if you surround yourself with great people, you'll be really successful as a business. So yeah, I think it does come with passions,
but also quite bored.
Well, again, it depends what you're passionate about. So I'm probably passionate about some fairly dull stuff in the eyes of most engineers, to be honest. So, and I'm okay with that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you have to be passionate about the results, right? And then there's some dull parts to it, but that's fine because you're passionate about the results and moving the business and what you can achieve as a team. And yeah, so then the dull parts aren't dull because you basically focus on the goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like big picture stuff. I've always liked big picture stuff. So for me, it's that whole picture of how is this whole thing going to work over the next 2 to 3 years, where other people just don't see that as being kind of remotely interesting. And that's, I've had an academic career a long, long time ago, and it was all big picture stuff. So that's just, I guess, the passion that I have and the way that the lens that I like to look at the world through. So
but I guess the brutal reality is surely that's where the money is as well, right? You're going to earn more doing more managerial, higher level, big picture stuff than you are topping out as the most senior technical role in most organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge, and I think, unfortunately, that's why a lot of probably very good engineers decide that they want to look at a CTO role, not because they're passionate about doing leadership roles and being involved in the C-level and things like that, but because they see nowhere else to go. And my view when we had good engineering teams was that you, as a principal engineer, who is an absolute expert in their field, there shouldn't be any reason why you can't be paid as much as someone who is in a leadership role, in a senior leadership role, because you're still adding value to the business. But unfortunately, I think most career progressions and salary expectations unfortunately don't work that way. So
isn't it about impact and responsibilities? If you're sort of responsible for a 5 million budget for the company, and the difference between you sort of doing a good job and not doing a good job is whether that 5 million goes down the drain, or that 5 million actually leads to the company growing, versus an individual contributor, no matter how good, they can have some massive impact, but that's very rare. That's usually your fellow kind of style, and usually those people end up being leaders anyway without the title.
Yeah.
So agreed. I mean, I just on that, by the way, I've only really ever operated in early stage companies. So I founded an early stage tech company, was the de facto CTO and technical bod for quite some years, but then ultimately, as others have said, made myself redundant, hired a CTO. And what ultimately happened was I was very good at being a CEO and management, but I really, really missed the technical hands-on stuff. So, but that's only, operating in the village level, to use Ken's diagram. So I do get the trade-off.
Yeah, I think as a founder, I think it's quite a brave step as well. The company I work for, they did it. Their technical founder did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think he was more challenged afterwards with the fact that everybody still said, well, you're the tech founder, so you're the de facto decision maker. And he had to say, I'm not, I'm just one of you.
Oh, I just stopped attending the stand-ups.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Let them get on with it.
Yeah.
But hats off to him. He followed his passions, and I think the business was probably, he was definitely more successful as a result of it. So, yeah.
By the way, just regarding AI integrations, I'm in between roles at the moment, and that's what I'm basically spending my time doing, researching large language models and prototyping. So if anyone does, just to give myself a quick plug, if anyone does find themselves in a situation where they want to take a deep dive on something or just chat about capabilities of LLMs, I put my details in the document.
Okay, brilliant. So, any more thoughts? So, I guess go back to our question. What do we mean by CTOs need to be technical? I think this is always quite a good discussion, because the answer to this conversation is inevitably it depends. So I think there's an element of, do they need to be technical? I think for me, it's always been, you've got to know enough to be dangerous, but you've got to know that you don't know enough to not be a liability. So you've got to know enough that people respect you, that you understand where their problems are, but not necessarily that you're going to be the guy that's going to solve their problems for them. Get back to that. So do we have to be technical? Can we hire it in? I think there was a great point earlier, which was actually your role is to build the organization and build the team of good technical people. You hire and fire based on building the team that are going to deliver the business or not. How do we cope with the lure of new tech? I think that's either a business angle, or for me, it's often been, we go and find third parties, particularly in a smaller business. Go back to that. We don't have to be experts in everything. We need to be really good at delivering value to our customers with the products that we're building. And that's our primary goal. Other stuff, actually, maybe we need to go and get some third parties that are actually going to help us do it. So, and Carl is available if you need him. How do we help aspiring CTOs navigate this? I think that's always an interesting one, because it's a question that never seems to go away. Is anybody here an aspiring CTO? Are they struggling with this kind of overall problem?
I think I'm fairly clear in my mind about my passions, where a CTO role would be. I think I'm struggling with the founders and what they think a CTO should be, and getting alignment there. So I think it's more about helping a business work out what they want from a CTO than me understanding what I could deliver as a CTO.
Yeah, similar. I'm an aspiring CTO, and I'm very much confident around my passions, but they're not kind of aligned with the board here. So it's a case of waiting for the right opportunity to present itself.
From my perspective, I think a lot of what you said around growing a team resonates. I've got a head of engineering at the moment, and everything I do is around culture rather than being hands-on. But I think there is a disconnect between the perception of what I'm doing and what that would be from a CTO perspective.
Might be like it's a really hard job or role, right? By taking your first CTO role, because then you kind of tend to either end up like it's hard to go for that large company CTO role directly, right? And then you either end up with the kind of the startup CTO, where you should be the super technical, super geek, right? Or if you manage to do that kind of in between switch, but then you kind of have this a bit more on the technical side, and then growing into kind of what we've been speaking about here as in larger companies. So I think it's a quite difficult role to take, and you're really just in this chasm, basically pegged right into it when you're starting to do those roles. So for my sake, I was lucky enough. I've been part of a startup or a company from quite small, and then I had the VP engineering role as we grew, right? And then actually, so for a couple of years, we didn't have a CTO when I had that responsibility, but I had the title VP Engineering, which was helpful, right? And I think as you grow, at least that I think that might be a good way to move into it. I think to do the VP Engineering part first, and then go into that larger company CTO.
Yeah. I went into my first CTO role from a head of software engineering.
Yep.
You know, so I think I had a team of about 120 as a head of software engineering, and I went into a CTO role with a team of 20, something like that. And I look back at the value did I bring, why did they take me on? And they took me on because they said, we want to be a team of 120 and you know how to do it. And I could demonstrate how to run a team of 120 people. So yeah, I think that VP role is a great place to go. And at some point, I think you've then got to be able to demonstrate that can you take a company in a CTO role to a particular place. So it might be that, you know, you go for a VP engineer role, you get yourself into bigger organizations, you run bigger teams, and then you take that step downwards in scale to be able to then scale it back up again. Conscious time, I think we've got about 2 minutes. Any closing thoughts from people? Great discussion, by the way. So thanks for all your input. I always think this is quite an interesting conversation. So,
yeah, closing thought for me, Ken, is that your mind map visual, I think, is a superb way of outlining what are the things outside of technology that a CTO ought to be doing, and I think it really helps for people to sort of have that aha moment that, okay, if I'm going from that sort of small startup environment to more of a scaled up environment, that's the leap I need to take. So that's a very illuminating sort of chart. So thanks for that.
Okay, maybe I'll try and do something with that. Yeah, I expect I'll show it to most people and they'll go, "You've got to be kidding." That looks dull.
Not early stage founders, you won't, Ken.
No, exactly. No, then you bring me in to do your dull stuff. So, yeah, and that's okay. I'm good with that. So, brilliant.
That was great. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, everybody. That was a great session. Really enjoyed that.
Thanks all. Thanks, Ken. Nice to meet you all. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.